everyone and welcome. This is Mindy Egan for Lawn Fawn, and in today's video, I am going to create a Conversation Hearts themed card. I'm going to start by stamping out my images. So I dug back through my stash and I am going to be using the How You Bean and How You Bean Conversation Hearts add-on. So I have the jar and then also the Conversation Hearts. I'm going to be stamping them in jet black ink onto 80-pound white cardstock. And then I'm also going to be using the Critter Conversation Hearts. So I picked out all of the adorable critters in this set. Again, inking them up with the jet black ink and stamping them on the 80-pound white cardstock. Now we can color all of these images in with colored pencils, alcohol markers, but I decided to use the coloring stencils to make this really quick and easy. And it really helps to use mini blending brushes, which is what I'm using today, and also the mini ink cubes. So to start with, I have my cardstock placed on a 9x12 sticky mat. This is going to hold my cardstock in place and also my stencil when it overhangs the cardstock. But for some of the areas where it's in the middle of the cardstock, I do like to use post-it tape to kind of tack that down for me. And post-it tape also helps kind of mask off the edges in case I get a little carried away with the ink blending. The colors that I'm going to be using today is Ballet Slippers, Bubblegum, Fake Tan, Pumpkin Spice, Sunflower, Minty Fresh, Merman, and then for the bear, the mole, and the deer, I needed to have a variety of browns. So I did pizza crust, dough, crunchy leaf, and walnut. And then I have soot for the hooves of the deer. Now, with the browns, you may not necessarily need all of those different browns. You can get a great variation of color just depending how much ink you're applying and how hard you're applying it. The other thing that is helpful with this sticky mat is that it is holding my mini ink cube in place. So that's kind of a bonus. When I was trying to pick out colors for my hearts, I was really thinking about, well, for one, a rainbow, but also the different colors that are in the Conversation Heart candy packs. And when I was doing the ink blending, I kept the darkest kind of shade of it on the outside and then faded off towards the center just to give it a little variation. A little tip I want to give is to make sure that your black ink that you use to stamp is completely dry. Maybe hit it with a heat tool because some of the lighter colors, like the yellow and that minty fresh, can kind of pick up that black ink a little bit if it's not completely dry. I'm adding just a little bit of shading to my candy jar and also the lid. And then for the conversation hearts that are going to be inside of the jar, I went through and used the same colors that all of the critters are going to be holding. And this again, I just kind of varied the pressure that I was applying so that it was darker in one area and then a little lighter as it got towards the outer edges. So while I love coloring with my alcohol markers, the coloring stencils made this go super quick and I could still add contrast. I used the coordinating dies to die cut everything out, just holding them in place with post-it tape. And now I want to add some sentiments to the heart. So I'm going to do it first for the conversation hearts. And I tried to fill in as many hearts as I can with the variety of sentiments that are included on that add-on set. Some of the hearts were a little too tucked in for me to add a sentiment to. And I just used some black ink and a small block to be able to stamp those on the hearts. I have a die cut piece. This is going to be the backer for my jar, and I want to add just a little bit of color to it so it's not so stark white. And for that, I am using Merman ink and a blending brush, and I'm going to apply just a light amount of color to that background. Then I can add a tape runner to the back of my hearts and I can place this right inside of my jar. So I want to make sure I place my hearts in there before I put the outline on there. This outline would be really, really cute for a shaker card, but I'm just going to pop it up with some thin foam squares. I added my lid to the top as well using those foam squares. And I really like to use the thin foam squares because it pops it up just a little bit to add dimension, but not too much where it's really bulky. To start setting the scene for my card, I die cut out the largest die from the postage rectangle stackables using lobster cardstock. And then I also used the largest die from the small stitched rectangle stackables out of white cardstock. So I'm going to get that nice postage border, but also have a stitched border on my white background. I also die cut out the wood grain light brown cardstock out of that stitched rectangle and then just trimmed it down so that I'm creating kind of a grounding place for all of my elements. So my background was just a little bit too white for me, so I am going to kind of tone that down a little bit with some merman ink. Again, just a really light hand. I did take my Post-it tape and go around to the outer edge, and I lined it up so it's right up to the stitching. That's going to give me a white border around it. And then I'm going to come over the top with the Outline Hearts stencil. And again, just a light amount of pressure, just enough to add interest to the background, but not be super distracting from my sentiment and the image or the scene that I'm creating. I'm adding sparkle to the background by squishing down my merman ink pad onto my glass work surface, and then I'm going to add in the liquid stardust. So essentially, I am coloring my sparkles here. So it's going to be a really pretty blue shimmer, and I'm splattering that on the background. And then I'm also taking white acrylic paint and splattering that as well. Then I can remove that Post-it tape. You can see I still have a really nice thin white border, which is going to create separation when I place this onto that lobster cardstock. Now I can start building up my scene. So I'm taking that wood grain cardstock that I had trimmed down and I'm adding that to the front of my panel with the tape runner. The white panel that I stenciled on, I am putting on some thin foam strips and I'm going to add that to that lobster cardstock that I die cut from the postage rectangles. I went ahead and laid out the scene that I wanted to do, and I ended up not using one of the critters just because it started to get a little bit crowded. But the fox and the bunny I placed in the background, so I'm kind of making this symmetrical on each side, is really what's going to end up happening. I'm using the thin foam squares once again for the bunny and the fox, and also my jar of conversation hearts. I will add the other critters in the front a little later on. I decided I needed to get my sentiment in place before I do anything else. I'm going to be doing some heat embossing. So I have a piece of black licorice cardstock that I prepped with an anti-static powder tool. I'm going to stamp the Happy Valentine's Day sentiment multiple times using the white Yeti pigment ink. Now this sentiment comes off of the How You Been Conversation Hearts add-on set. Once I stamp that, I'm sprinkling on my white embossing powder, and then I'm going to melt that with the heat tool. I don't have a lot of room on the front of my card, so I'm going to use this skinny banner from the Everyday Sentiments banner die set to trim out my sentiment. I did go ahead off screen and add in the other two critters. They are slightly overlapping the jar. So, kind of in the bottom corner of each critter, there's a foam square, and then I just used some liquid glue to add them where they overlap the jar. I added white gel pen highlights to my critters and the hearts, and then I popped up the sentiment using black foam squares. I have a card base that I created. It is going to be a top folding card base, and I used Ballet Slippers as the background piece. And then I went ahead and added the rest of my scene using those thin foam strips. So there is my Conversation Hearts themed card. I love how these new products coordinate with some older products, so I was able to really mix and match these. I hope you enjoyed today's inspiration. Thank you so much for joining me today.